Throughout the decades, the Final Fantasy series has presented players with tough challenges that go way beyond simply beating the game. Perhaps you found yourself hell-bent on collecting every single triple triad card, or spent hours filling up the Sky Pirate Stem with colourful sprites. Or perhaps you might even have memories of gearing up your party with the hope of taking down Emerald Weapon once and for all. But no matter how you played these games, there's always been that greater goal, something just out of reach that would taunt even the most determined completionists. It's one of the many things that makes the series great, and it's why fans are prepared to literally invest hundreds of hours across multiple playthroughs. Back in the olden days, many of these feats were done for self-gratification or for bragging rights amongst friends. But Final Fantasy XIII took things to the next level with the introduction of trophies. From this moment onwards, players could be instantly rewarded for their skill and determination with a trophy. This served to remind them of what they'd achieved, but more importantly, it could be shown off to friends all around the world. These virtual rewards came in all shapes and sizes, from standard progression trophies earned by clearing each chapter, through to trophies granted for defeating very difficult foes. And a platinum would then be granted for mastering everything. Since then, trophies have been added to countless games in the Final Fantasy series, including remakes and reimaginings of classic titles. We've released videos before about these hard-to-get trophies from the core games, such as obtaining every weapon and accessory in Final Fantasy XIII, or the jump rope challenge in Final Fantasy IX. But as more and more people have been playing these games over time, this means that the rarity of certain trophies has changed. It's for that reason that this time we've decided to take a look at pretty obscure trophies from titles you may or may not have played, and we'll be asking why so few gamers have ever managed to attain them. Many of them challenge the player in terms of skill, luck, or a seemingly endless grind, but some of them remain rare for other, more interesting and perhaps unusual reasons. So, without further ado, here are 7 near impossible trophies that almost nobody has ever obtained. Itadaki Street was a digital wargame series from the mind of Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii. It was first released on the Famicom back in 1991, and the series has since seen 11 more titles released across just as many platforms. The mechanics of Itadaki Street are similar to those of Monopoly. Much like in the classic real estate themed board game, players roll the dice to move around the board, purchase property squares in order to earn cash, and draw special cards when prompted that might help or hinder them on the road to success. The major addition was the stock market feature, which added a wholly different layer of challenge and strategy when planning your next move. As time has passed, one of the more appealing aspects of Itadaki Street is the inclusion of characters from Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, and Mario. But despite being associated with these big brands, Itadaki Street games are seldom released in the West. Fortune Street, or Boom Street as it was called in Europe and Australia, serves as a major exception. This featured Dragon Quest and Mario characters when it was released on the Wii back in 2011. But there were, of course, no trophies in that game. That's why we're instead going to focus on 2017's Itadaki Street Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy 30th Anniversary, which did feature trophies. But these trophies were exclusive to either those who lived in Japan or imported a copy. And that, alongside the requirement of winning 30 online matches, explains why this trophy is so rare. If you've ever played Monopoly, you'll know that games can run for several hours at a time, often long past the point when anyone's actually enjoying themselves. Now imagine doing that 30 times and having to win every single match, because that's what this trophy required in order to obtain it. To make the acquisition a bit easier, trophy hunters have invested in boosting sessions. But even still, playing through that many matches, even when requirements were reduced to ensure shorter player times, can still take quite a significant time investment. And it also doesn't take into consideration that boosters that helped you may expect the favour to be returned. Itadaki Street is an incredible and addictive board game, but this trophy would push those notions to the extreme. And given that the game is designed to appeal to more casual players as opposed to relentless trophy hunters, it's no wonder that so few gamers have ever actually achieved this reward. Now, over the years, fishing minigames have become a popular staple in role-playing games, life sims, and other genres. And while this might seem strange, a good fishing game can simulate the quiet and relaxing real-life pastime, the perfect way to unwind between battles while acquiring some aquatic resources. Final Fantasy XV featured a detailed fishing side quest, which was Noctis's leisure activity during free roam. Complete with a huge variety of lures, rods and reels, this minigame boasted a surprising amount of depth, as finding new fish could even unlock recipes to be cooked by Ignis at camp, which provided some incredibly helpful buffs for the whole party. Thanks to all of these elements, the fishing minigame found in Final Fantasy XV is regarded as one of the best in recent times. And due to this, the developers decided to take things a step further by creating Monster of the Deep, a standalone VR release focused entirely on fishing. This concept came about after Final Fantasy XV's first VR tech demo, which featured at E3 2016, wasn't terribly well received by the press. However, the demo was later reworked to focus around the game's core fishing mechanics and resurfaced as Monster of the Deep. But before players could go angling for the rare trophy of Caught Them All, they'd need to make sure they had all the right gear, not just in the game, but in real life. Because while Monster of the Deep didn't require players to own a copy of Final Fantasy XV, they did have to own a PSVR headset plus camera, which were neither cheap nor readily available in most regions at the time of release. So straight away, Monster of the Deep was designed to have a restricted player base, or a small pond, if you'll excuse the pun. And while many of those who did pick up the game found it to be an interesting novelty, few players found the game compelling enough to want to try and catch every single variety of fish in the game. When Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles came out on the GameCube, it was the first Final Fantasy game to be released on a Nintendo system in almost a decade. A new version, Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition, was released in 2020. Several enhancements were made to the original game, including new dungeons, improved graphics, the addition of voice acting, plus new music from composers Kumi Tanioka and Hidenori Iwasaki. But with this being a remastered edition, it also meant that trophies would be introduced to the game for the first time. However, Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition ended up having one of the shortest trophy lists in the entire franchise, with only 9 trophies available in total throughout the entire game. But what the list may have lacked in numbers, the gold trophy, Acquire All Artifacts, more than made up for in terms of effort, and was easily the grindiest trophy up for grabs. This particular trophy was only available in hard mode, which was unlocked by beating the game and earning the game's only other gold trophy, Caravan of Legend. Throughout the game, there were 79 artifacts available to find, and they related to 6 different areas: strength, defense, magic, pocket, rings, and heart. In each dungeon, 4 artifacts could be obtained from treasure chests or dropped from powerful foes, plus an additional 4 artifacts could be gathered by defeating the dungeon boss. That might not sound too bad, all things considered, but there was a catch. While you could gain up to 8 artifacts per dungeon, you would only get to keep 1 of them. This meant that, in order to obtain the trophy, players would need to clear a bare minimum of 79 dungeons. That's way more than was required to beat the game or to obtain any of the other 8 trophies. But on the plus side, none of the artifacts were missable, so each one could be collected at any time. Plus, those artifacts you've already gained would no doubt come in handy should you choose to go after the rest. While many of the entries on this list are designed to test a player's patience, subjecting them to long, repetitive grinds, Corruptor of the Immaculate earned its place through its secrecy and sheer difficulty. Enter Vyse, the only secret superboss on this list. Vyse the Immaculate, who first appeared in Dirge of Cerberus, could be found in the Shinra VR Combat Simulator as part of the Intergrade version of Final Fantasy VII Remake. According to enemy intel, this iteration of Vyse was a depraved and ruthless soldier recreated in virtual space, who reigned supreme over deep ground. He was therefore fast, aggressive, and many of his attacks were unblockable. So while finding Vyse was one thing, defeating him was quite another. This match, known as 3-person team versus the Immaculate One, was an incredibly tough boss fight that took place in several phases. It's also one of the few Rank 7 battles available through the combat simulator, which was as high as the ranking system went. Therefore, anyone who wanted to take down Vyse would need to strategize accordingly. Vyse had no elemental weaknesses, and the Gotterdammerung, easily the best accessory available in the game, was rendered only half as effective during this fight, although the battle description claimed that it had no effect at all. As well as dishing out powerful attacks with his twin gunblades, such as the aptly named Obliteration and Evisceration, Vyse was also able to phase shift throughout the battle. Doing this granted him the abilities and weaponry of Rosso and Azul, two other antagonists from Dirge Cerberus. Once Vice shifted back to his regular mode, he then unleashed the devastating Immaculate End attack, which dealt an inescapable 9,999 damage to each party member. Based on this, it's easy to see why so few players have managed to claim this trophy, because when taking down Vice, strategy was everything. Most of the advice out there heavily focuses on staggering, as without this tactic, it can be difficult to deal any damage to Vice at all. However, Vice also has the ability to reduce his own stagger gauge. Many strategies include defeating him quickly before he can phase shift, but timing is of the absolute essence, as is choosing the right party members. So, if you're someone who's trying to take down the Immaculate One, all we can do is say good luck. When Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin was announced as a dark reimagining of the very first game, it took a lot of people by surprise. That then continued once they learnt more about Jack Garland and his desperate crusade against a malevolent entity known as Chaos. By combining the traditional Final Fantasy job class system with more Souls-like elements, Stranger of Paradise provided an interesting new spin on its source material, and it meant there was a lot of fun to be had with the trophies. But we're going to focus on the game's second expansion, Wanderer of the Rift, which was released on the 26th of October 2022. This expansion continued to reimagine classic elements of Final Fantasy with the inclusion of Gilgamesh and the Blue Mage job class. Also included was a Tonberry blacksmith, who could appraise the player's gear to unlock powerful effects known as blessings. And from looking at the announcement on Square Enix's website, they were really excited to announce his character, even assuring fans that Tonberries work much faster than they walk. That then brings us on to the trophy, which was earned by maxing out your affinity with the Tonberry blacksmith known as Sid Tomberini. But in order to make this happen, players would have to first acquire a good amount of summon stones and raise their affinities with several other monster characters. Doing so also unlocked their real names, such as the adorably named Cactuar Mrs. Prickles, who granted the player a grudge knife. This must be then given to Sid's grandson, Mid Tomberini, because what could possibly go wrong by giving a knife to a Tonberry? As you might expect, this trophy took a lot of time and investment from the player, as they would be required to max out affinities with several other characters before Sid Tomberini. But maybe the real trophy was the friends we made along the way. Earning trophies in MMORPGs can be, to put it mildly, a bit on the grindy side, and the next item on our list is by no means an exception. For the longest time, Final Fantasy XIV has featured 4 different trophies with the title Living Off the Land that have required players to gather a certain number of items. These are known as collectibles, a feature made available for crafting and gathering classes during the Heavensward update, and they range from level 1, awarded for gathering 1,000 collectibles, up to level 4, which requires a whopping 8,000 collectibles. To put this into perspective, here's a list of everything you'd need to do within the game to even have a hope of obtaining the trophy. First, the collectible system has to be unlocked by completing the level 50 main quest scenario, The Better Half. Then you have to talk to an NPC to trigger the optional quest Inscrutable Tastes, which must be completed before the collectathon can commence. From this point on, characters from the gathering classes, Miner, Botanist and Fisher, are able to start grinding for those precious collectibles. However, the Fisher is generally not recommended for this task, and most players who've earned this trophy would suggest getting your character and gear to above level 80 before even starting. If that sounds like the hard part over and done with, think again. Even with additional abilities in place, such as Wise to the World for the Botanist, which granted an extra gathering attempt, players can only hope to gain 3 to 4 collectibles per node, and remember, the goal here is to harvest 8,000 of them. It's therefore no wonder that this has been described as one of the longest trophies in the game. There's also the question of, what do you do with all these collectibles? Turning them in for scripts proves to be even more time consuming, and just throwing them away is a waste of valuable resources. Overall, it's estimated that obtaining Living Off the Land requires the player to sink in on average 120 hours. In the words of Atraveris, a user on the PSN Profiles forum, have lots of movies or TV shows to binge on, because it's going to be a while. That then brings us on to our final trophy, which is from another Final Fantasy XV related property, Comrades. Comrades was a multiplayer expansion that allowed players to create their own avatar and join forces with up to 3 players online. Set 6 months after the events of Chapter 13, the objective was to collect meteor shards and restore light to a world engulfed in darkness. As members of the Kingsglade, players were granted special powers by equipping royal sigils, accessories bearing the insignias of past sovereigns, which could be unlocked throughout the game. And as you might expect, collecting every royal sigil would also grant the player a trophy bearing the title Blessed by All. Obtaining this bronze trophy might sound straightforward enough if you happened to be playing the expansion pack back when it was first released. But finding real-life companions in Comrades these days is said to be virtually impossible. And while AI companions are available, by all accounts, they're not the brightest, and players are likely to have a much harder time getting through the game as a result. Plus, let's face it, that's just not the experience most of us want when playing a multiplayer game. But that's not even the biggest obstacle you'll face on the road to this incredibly rare trophy. Final Fantasy XV Comrades was re-released as a standalone game in December 2018, complete with 10 new bosses and a brand new trophy list. While the new version was given free to anyone who'd purchased the original game, support for the older version was terminated, and the original trophies were never removed. As a result, Blessed by All has become all but inaccessible, leaving many players stranded in their pursuit of it. Patching the game is technically still possible, at least according to a PSN forum user called Golden Devil Gamer, who was good enough to share a detailed step-by-step guide as to how to get it back. But let's be honest, just looking at these instructions is enough to give us a headache. But that's the general feeling a lot of these trophies present, as even though some are well designed and promote a real sense of achievement, others are more torturous affairs designed to break our spirits and push our loyalty and commitment to the brink. With that being said, how many of these trophies have you managed to obtain? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and of course, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Alright everyone, with that, this is Darryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Gregory, Justin Dent, and Sukun DDK, who are super special Onion Night supporters. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.